24 men knelt in the rubber plantation at Batang Kali. By noon, all of them were dead. British soldiers would later claim the villagers had tried to escape. The villagers' wives and children, forced to watch from a nearby hut, would tell a very different story. December 12, 1948. The Malayan Emergency was barely 6 months old. British colonial forces faced an escalating guerrilla war against the Malayan Communist Party, and the jungle had become a battleground where the lines between combatant and civilian blurred with terrifying ease. The Scots Guards arrived at Batang Kali the previous evening, a small rubber estate about 30 miles north of Kuala Lumpur. They separated the men from the women and children and held them overnight for questioning. What happened the next morning would remain buried for decades. But when the truth finally began to surface, it would reveal something far darker than a single wartime atrocity. It would expose a pattern of official denial, legal obstruction, and institutional silence stretching across 7 decades. According to the British military account, the soldiers had divided the male detainees into small groups for further interrogation. During these sessions, the men allegedly attempted to flee into the surrounding jungle. The Scots Guards opened fire, as protocol demanded. 24 suspected communist sympathizers were killed while escaping. The story was accepted without serious scrutiny. In the chaos of the emergency, with British rubber planters being assassinated and communist forces ambushing convoys, few questioned whether 24 men had really all decided to run simultaneously into a hail of bullets. The bodies were buried. The patrol moved on. The war continued. But even in 1948, cracks appeared in the official narrative. A member of the patrol reportedly confided to a police officer that the killings had been deliberate executions, not responses to an escape attempt. This information reached the desk of Britain's Attorney General, Sir Hartley Shawcross, and then something remarkable happened. Nothing. The matter was quietly closed. The women and children of Batang Kali had been confined to a kongsi, a communal longhouse, throughout the night and into the morning. They heard the gunfire. Some reported being ordered to keep their heads down. Others described seeing bodies afterward, positioned in ways that contradicted the escape narrative. Chong Kun Ying was a young girl that December morning. Her father was among the dead. For the rest of her life, she would insist that the men had been executed in cold blood, that there had been no escape attempt, that the entire official account was a fabrication designed to protect British soldiers from accountability. Other survivors told similar stories. The men had been compliant. They had not resisted. They had been lined up and shot. The women spoke of soldiers returning to the bodies, ensuring none survived. These testimonies would prove remarkably consistent across decades of interviews, investigations, and legal proceedings. What the survivors described was not a chaotic response to a mass escape. It was a massacre. For 20 years, Batang Kali remained a footnote in the violent history of the Malayan Emergency. Then, in 1969, a series of articles in the People newspaper reignited interest in the case. Former members of the Scots Guards patrol came forward with accounts that corroborated the survivors' testimonies. William Coates, a private who had been present that morning, described the killings as systematic executions. He stated that officers had ordered the patrol to finish them off. Other veterans provided similar accounts, describing a premeditated operation rather than a spontaneous response to fleeing prisoners. The testimony was explosive. It suggested that a British Army unit had committed a war crime and that the military establishment had covered it up. The British government ordered a police investigation. Files were gathered. Witnesses were interviewed, but what followed illustrated a pattern that would repeat itself for decades. The investigation was quietly shelved. No prosecutions were brought. The classified documents disappeared into the archives. The families of Batang Kali never stopped seeking justice. Chong Kun Ying and other survivors formed an action committee, traveling to London to demand accountability. They found allies in human rights organizations and investigative journalists who continued to press the case. In 2008, the British government announced it would not reopen the investigation into Batang Kali. The decision prompted the families to take their case to the courts. In 2011, they launched a judicial review, arguing that the government was legally obligated to conduct an independent inquiry into the killings. The legal battle that followed exposed the elaborate mechanisms by which governments avoid accountability for historical atrocities. Lawyers for the British state argued that too much time had passed, that witnesses had died, that documents had been lost or destroyed. They invoked procedural barriers and jurisdictional limitations. They fought not on the merits of the case, but on technicalities designed to prevent the merits from ever being examined. Despite official resistance, researchers and journalists continued to uncover damning evidence. Colonial-era files released under Freedom of Information requests showed that authorities in 1948 had possessed evidence suggesting murder rather than lawful killing. Internal memoranda revealed concerns about the official narrative. Legal advisors had raised questions. These questions had been ignored. Perhaps most significantly, the documents showed that the decision not to prosecute had been made at the highest levels of the British government. This was not bureaucratic oversight or wartime confusion. It was a deliberate choice to protect soldiers and preserve British prestige at the cost of justice for 24 murdered civilians. The parallels to other colonial atrocities became impossible to ignore. Batang Kali was not an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern of violence and impunity that characterized the British response to anti-colonial movements across the empire. In 2012, the High Court rejected the family's bid for a public inquiry. The Court of Appeal upheld that decision in 2014. Finally, in 2015, the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom delivered its ruling. By a margin of 4-3, the justices denied the family's appeal. The majority opinion acknowledged that the killings at Batang Kali had the hallmarks of a deliberate execution. The court accepted that the official escape narrative was almost certainly false. Nevertheless, the justices ruled that the passage of time and the practical difficulties of investigation outweighed the obligation to establish the truth. 3 dissenting justices disagreed. They argued that the very factors cited by the majority, the delay, the loss of evidence, the death of witnesses, had been caused by decades of government obstruction. To use those factors as justification for denying an inquiry, they wrote, was to reward the state for its own misconduct. Chong Kun Ying died in 2017 without seeing justice for her father. Other survivors followed. The soldiers of the Scots Guards patrol are gone. The colonial administrators who made the decision to bury the investigation have long since passed. The living memory of Batang Kali fades with each year. But the questions remain. 24 men were killed on a December morning in 1948, and the British state has never fully accounted for their deaths. Official inquiries were blocked. Court cases were dismissed. The institutional machinery of denial operated with remarkable consistency across 7 decades, 4 prime ministers, and countless opportunities to choose transparency over obfuscation. What happened at Batang Kali matters not only because 24 lives were taken, but because of what the aftermath reveals about the architecture of impunity. When states commit atrocities, they also construct elaborate systems to avoid accountability. These systems outlast governments and administrations. They become self-perpetuating, each act of concealment creating new justifications for continued silence. The families of Batang Kali understood this. They fought not only for their own dead, but against a machinery designed to ensure that certain truths never receive official acknowledgement. Their defeat in the courts was not a vindication of British justice. It was a demonstration of its limits, a reminder that legal systems built by states often prove remarkably effective at protecting states from the consequences of their own violence.